Welcome to Story Craft Portal, where we uncover stories that go beyond headlines and touch the depths of the human heart. Today's story isn't just about murder. It's about broken trust, a love that turned deadly, and a chilling betrayal that shakes the very soul. What happens when the man sworn to protect turns into the one you need protection from? She was a woman of warmth, laughter, and light. A soul too tender for the darkness that was quietly brewing in her own home. Kendy Howard lived in the small, wooded town of Athol, Idaho, where pine trees stood tall and secrets ran deep. From the outside, her marriage to former Idaho State Trooper Dan Howard looked picture perfect. 2 kids, a quiet house, smiles in public. But behind the closed doors, silence had a weight, and her smiles grew fewer with each passing day. In early February 2021, Kendy posted a quote online: "Sometimes silence is the loudest cry for help." No one noticed. Not her friends, not her family, and certainly not Dan. That week, Kendy confided in a close friend, "If something ever happens to me, don't believe it was an accident." It wasn't just a chilling remark. It was the beginning of a real-life nightmare that would shake an entire community. February 2nd, 2021, began like any other day, until a 911 call shattered the stillness of Athol. Dan Howard's voice on the line was eerily calm. "My wife shot herself. She's in the tub," he said. First responders arrived within minutes to find Kendy Howard's lifeless body in the bathtub. A single gunshot wound visible, the water tinged red. The scene felt staged. Officers noted a broken glass, scattered towels, and a packed duffel bag near the door. Strange details for a supposed suicide. Dan's behavior raised eyebrows too, detached, robotic, rehearsed. He offered no tears, only a timeline. "We argued, she locked herself in. I heard a bang," he repeated, but inconsistencies slipped through his words like cracks in a dam. Something wasn't right. Investigators didn't say it aloud yet, but every trained instinct told them this wasn't suicide. This was a cover-up, and Dan Howard was hiding something dark. Dan Howard repeated his story like a script, but detectives noticed the plot holes. If Kendy had shot herself, why was there bruising on her arms? Why was her jaw fractured? The autopsy deepened the mystery. Kendy had not died from the gunshot. Her cause of death: strangulation. The bullet was fired post-mortem. It was a carefully constructed lie. Forensics found no gunpowder on her hands, but Dan's clothes were stained with blood. Behind his badge and former title, investigators saw a man who had lost control. They uncovered months of tension, texts from Kendy to friends saying she feared for her safety, a pending divorce, and whispers of someone new in her life. Kendy had been planning to leave, and Dan knew it. His reputation, already stained from his past, couldn't survive another scandal. So he did the unthinkable, and then he tried to make it look like she did it. As the investigation gained momentum, the facade of Dan Howard's clean life unraveled. He wasn't just a retired state trooper. He was a man with a troubled past. In 2014, he had quietly resigned after multiple criminal charges: theft, property damage, hunting violations. His badge had hidden his demons, but now everything was in the open. Investigators learned Kendy had been the one holding the family together, quietly enduring his rage behind closed doors. Friends recalled her fading light, once bubbly and bright, now withdrawn and quiet. She had begun keeping a journal. In it, pages were filled with fear. "He watches everything. Even in silence, I feel like I'm screaming and no one hears me." Each word was a silent plea, and when she finally decided to leave, she signed her own death warrant. The case was no longer about how Kendy died. It was about why she was never saved. Detectives confronted Dan with the mounting evidence. The bruises, the lack of gunpowder, the staged scene, nothing aligned with his story. Dan sat expressionless, hands clasped, eyes vacant. She was unstable, he muttered. She couldn't handle life, but his words rang hollow. Prosecutors built a chilling timeline. Kendy told a friend she'd serve him divorce papers that week. The very next day, she was dead. Surveillance footage showed Dan buying gloves and bleach 2 days prior. His computer history revealed searches like how to make a murder look like suicide. They had him. But the scariest part wasn't the crime. It was how calmly he had tried to erase her. In court, the room fell silent as Kendy's mother took the stand, voice breaking. She trusted him. She loved him, and he destroyed her. The truth was undeniable now. But the battle for justice had only just begun. Dan Howard's trial became the talk of the state. News outlets buzzed with updates, but inside the courtroom, raw emotion echoed louder than headlines. The prosecution painted a vivid picture, a man driven by control, furious at losing his grip. Kendy was finally reclaiming her life. He couldn't allow that. Evidence came forward in waves. Voice messages from Kendy, frightened and desperate. Her therapist's notes describing years of manipulation. Even her children's quiet testimonies, confirming the growing fear in their home. Dan's defense tried to label Kendy unstable, mentally unwell, but it fell apart under the weight of her careful planning to escape. Her bank withdrawals, job applications, and packed bag were proof. She was preparing for freedom, not the end. One juror whispered to another during a break, "You can feel the truth in this room." And it was true. The air carried Kendy's voice, even if she wasn't there to speak. Witness after witness took the stand, painting the story Dan couldn't erase. A friend recalled Kendy calling her in tears. He said, "If I ever leave, no one will find me alive." A coworker testified how Kendy hid bruises under long sleeves, even in summer. Then came a forensic psychologist who unraveled Dan's profile. Narcissistic traits, lack of remorse, obsession with control. The courtroom sat frozen as text messages were read aloud. Cold, threatening, suffocating. Dan didn't flinch. He watched without emotion, as if disconnected from the storm he created. But Kendy's voice lived on, in screenshots, voicemails, journal pages. Every piece of evidence was a thread in the tapestry of truth. The jury didn't see a grieving husband. They saw a man who had rehearsed his lies so long. He started believing them. The case wasn't just about murder anymore. It was about silencing a woman who refused to stay silent. Outside the courthouse, supporters held candles in Kendy's memory. Inside, the defense made its final attempt. They claimed stress, emotional instability, even postpartum depression. But no one bought it. Not when the facts stood firm like granite. Dan had the motive. He had the means. And most importantly, he had the pattern. The court saw the slow erosion of Kendy's life, the way she was cut off from friends, isolated, silenced. It wasn't one moment of madness. It was a carefully layered cage. In closing arguments, the prosecutor's voice trembled as she said, she was not unstable. She was trapped. And every I turned to Dan, unmoved, expressionless, as if justice were just another inconvenience. The jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed, then a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder and domestic battery. The courtroom erupted into quiet sobs. For the first time since Kendy died, her voice had finally been heard. The sentencing hearing was the final chapter Kendy's family never wanted to write. Her daughter, barely holding back tears, read a letter. I still hear her laugh. But now it hurts. Her son simply said, "You took our light and left us in the dark." Dan remained silent. No apology, no emotion. The judge, his voice steady but heavy, said, "You didn't just take a life. You extinguished a future." Dan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But punishment couldn't erase pain. Kendy's parents left the courtroom holding hands, eyes full of grief but also peace. They had fought for the truth and won. Outside, wind moved through the trees as if Kendy herself was passing through. Justice doesn't heal all wounds, but it gives the dead a voice. And sometimes that's all that's left. The case of Kendy Howard is now closed, but the scars remain. Her story sparked statewide conversations on domestic abuse, justice, and the silent battles many women face. A foundation was created in her name to support victims of intimate partner violence. Her journals, once scribbled in fear, now sit in a museum exhibit titled Her Voice. Dan Howard remains behind bars, a man who tried to erase a woman with a gun. but couldn't erase her truth. Kendy's memory lives on in every woman who finds strength to speak, in every survivor who refuses to be silenced. At her memorial, a friend whispered, "She never got to live her next chapter, but maybe we can write it for her." This wasn't just a murder. It was a message that silence can kill, but truth, when spoken, can change everything.